Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Willsmore, and this is Collaboration, a brief introduction to Bruce Tuckman's stages of group development. So this goes back to 1965, but it's become perhaps the most famous of the ways in which we reflect on how groups go through their stages from the start to the end. Probably a couple of reasons for this. One is actually they make a lot of sense, so that when you're in your groups and you are reflecting on how they work, you'll find that actually you see a lot of these characteristics appear from the beginning through to the end of that group work. So you'll find that it just makes a lot of sense. But there is another reason why it's also very famous, and that is it rhymes. So the stages, or at least the four initial stages, are forming, storming, norming, performing. Forming, storming, norming, performing has become a really easy way of remembering these different characteristics and different stages of small group developments. And they did add later, Tuckman and a collaborator did add later an adjourning. Adjourning. Forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning. Yeah, it doesn't quite work. Okay, but it's a later characteristic. So, the four initial stages were forming, stage 1. I've just written my own characteristic at the top here, and then I've included one quote from Tuckman's article, just a short quote for each one. So this tends to be towards a polite coming together of the group. The first hypothesized stage of the model is labelled as testing and dependence. The term testing refers to an attempt by group members to discover what interpersonal behaviours are acceptable in the group. Okay, let's just assume that you've just met. Actually, what you're trying to do is work out what other people are like. Do you like them? You're going to get on with them? You're just testing that ground, so it's probably quite polite to start with. Stage 2 is storming. Differences in individual ways of working come into conflict. So group members become hostile towards one another. Interaction is uneven and infighting is common. The lack of unity is an outstanding feature of this phase. So, as your group, you will have your task. It might be that you can see a way of making this task work. Somebody else might have a different way, and they might be more vocal about it. Or you might be more vocal about it, or somebody else. So this is the stage where you start to see conflicting approaches coming out. So you've been probably quite polite in the beginning. Now people are starting to argue because there are different ways in which the task might be achieved, for example. In the third stage, norming, individuals find common ways of working together as a group. Group members accept the group and accept the idiosyncrasies of fellow members. Harmony is of maximum importance. The task conflicts are avoided to ensure harmony. So in other words, at this stage, you've probably had the fighting, you've found ways of working around or with each other so that you can begin to normalise how you work. You're working towards a position whereby you are able to function properly as a group. So once you've got to that stage of being able to function as a group, you can then perform. So stage 4 is performing. The group has normalised operation and is able to perform successfully as a collective. The group can now become a problem-solving instrument. The group becomes a sounding board off which the task is played. The emphasis is on constructive action. Energy previously invested in structuring the group can be devoted to the task. So you've met, you've argued, you've found your ways of working. Now you can just get on with the task because you've all figured out how to work with each other, and you can operate on getting the task done successfully. A fifth stage was added later, 1977, so about 12 years later, by Tuckman and Mary Ann Jensen. And that was around this notion of that groups come to an end, there's a termination and then a separation of the group. So group projects are often time-based and they conclude, so individuals have to cope with not being in the group. It wasn't in the first 1965 version by Tuckman. I guess that was about getting the task done. This is how groups get around to doing the task. But of course, that's not necessarily the end of it, certainly from a psychology perspective, which is where Tuckman is coming from, with the original article being in a journal of psychology. So there we go. Forming, where you're testing others, individuals, to see what they're like. arguing with them, or arguments being had amongst, those arguments being resolved, coming to agreeing a way forward, and then performing so that you can get the job done. And then, of course, the group disbands. So there you go. A great way of reflecting upon your collaborative practices and your working within groups, forming, storming, norming, and performing. The article, go and find the articles. Really interesting to read. Much more detail. This is only a very briefest of brief descriptions of the types. Okay, thanks all.